Just curious if you're working with, perhaps a private equity backed company that is, looking to scale further, what your recommendations would be if you kind of notice that they are kind of lagging in some of those areas.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot of the conversations we will have. And by being effective in that talent acquisition, whether it's, head of sales, head of marketing, and then the subcategories, the performance marketing piece, the growth marketing pieces, getting the right salespeople in place. If that's successful, then it actually what tails that is either programmatic acquisition so they can grow faster. You can see how these conversations are really intertwined: talent acquisition and mergers and acquisition, fractional CMOs, or, things that you can do to save money.
We call that kind of founder led sales. And oftentimes companies, may or may not recognize that that can be a challenge to their
Mhm.
growth. And then, they start recognizing that, oh, we probably need a more scalable growth strategy and sales strategy that kind of goes beyond, the founder really leading, some of those efforts.
That scenario often, if you go back in that founder's experience, right, whether they were, maybe prior to being a founder, they're an executive, there's always this thing of like, okay, it's really hard to find a great salesperson. And so it's hard because you're kind of relying on your own network. Doing a robust kind of retained search process is really the answer to that. And, most investors and funders get that. Most founders take a little bit longer to understand that that's worth running that kind of a process.
Hi, everybody. Today I have with me Cory Samela. Cory is the owner of a firm, Salmela Talent, that is part recruiting firm, part M&A advisor, and they do all kinds of things to help founders and their teams of venture and private equity backed companies really scale and kind of win in today's kind of talent environment as well. So, welcome, Cory. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Lindsey. Great to join you.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Well, for the audience's background, would love for you to just tell us a little bit about your business, how you typically work with founders today, and who's kind of a typical client of yours.
Sure. Well, great. Thanks for having me again. And we've been collaborating here for the last few months, and it's been great. So thank you for your collaboration and inviting me to this format. So we work across the health spectrum. Like we started in that life science vendor or services space. So advertising, consulting, PR, anything that a pharma company would hire out. And that was a great place to be. And we often worked with, well, we've expanded now into digital health. We touch health tech, value-based care, managed markets. So we have a little niche in the provider space as well, where we help them with kind of the negotiators with the payers, and we work with the payers on negotiating with the providers in the hospital. So it's a fun little niche, but predominantly it's kind of in that health product. So whether it's a pharmaceutical product, it's a platform company that a life science company might use, or a patient, or a B2B play. That's our typical client. We love founder-led companies and helping them grow. So we'll help them with talent acquisition in the growth piece. We have started realizing we can help them with customer introductions, and where we've had some success there for our clients. Fractional, leadership and strategy is another way we help. And then fractional TA, fractional talent acquisition. There might be a period of 3 to 6 months where there's a real push. And instead of having to hire talent acquisition full time, you can kind of bring us on, and there's a talent or a volume discount, and we get to go and be your talent advisors for the next 3, 6, 12 months. So that's some of the ways. And then what's evolved is that because we love helping founders, transitioning is a big part of that. And what we started having those conversations as private equity has jumped into our core space, and so there's a lot of pressure, and so now we advise founders and we advise buyers to on the different types of options that they have, whether if they're the seller, the founder, we can introduce them to investment banks, to directly to buyers, and really advise around kind of what they need to do to be attractive. And on the buyer side, we're talking to the founders and we're supporting the founders, so they're very happy to maybe get a founder that's not on their radar, or hasn't entered into a sales process yet, and have early conversations with them. So, and then we know that this is a daunting process for a founder, so we're there to kind of guide them through the whole thing, which we're realizing is missing in the whole process, in a way. Like I think the banks do a great job, but really are focused on kind of bottom line things and less about the cultural stuff.
Yeah,
Which,
absolutely.
as recruiters, we really are dialed in on the cultural stuff and telling our clients' story, and bringing people that'll be of like mind to the companies, and really evaluating for culture every day, all day. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's still like a people business. So that's
yeah,
awesome that you kind of
absolutely.
take that approach. I can see how that would be really needed because, oftentimes this may be kind of their first big like fundraising type of situation they've been in. So there's probably a lot of really smart people out there that this is just kind of a whole new world for them to really
Correct.
operate in. So having that advisor or coach could really help. I mean, we kind of see similar things in our business, just from a different perspective, from a growth perspective. We work with a lot
Sure.
of people who are really smart and have a lot of great healthcare experience, but are new to kind of the employer market, for instance. So your model makes sense to me, there certainly. So kind of given that, it has generally been a bit more of a tough like fundraising environment, what are you hearing today in terms of like challenges that some of these founders are encountering, and what kind of investors and kind of the buyers that you're working with are really kind of looking for in these companies, from more of a fundamentals business perspective in order to kind of see, a successful organization?
Yeah, on kind of the startup VC backed side, or pre-backed side, maybe there's some angel investors involved and self-funding. I mean, I think it's just been difficult. And I think, if we look at just like AI in healthcare as an example, I think there's a lot of investment, but there's still a lot of wait and see attitude towards it. And, it feels like that first mover rule doesn't apply as much as it has in the past. And, I even had one kind of, AI leader saying, hey, we don't know what product we're going to want to make yet, because
Wow.
it's just not even responsible to do it well, to take off while a plane isn't even halfway done. So, I think, ultimately, the first movers, and even, there's skepticism around the legacy tech as well. Like, what are they doing to AIify themselves and future proof themselves? So there's a bit of wait and see. What are the big guys going to do? What is Viva going to do? What are they going to do with their AI agents? And so I think it's hard to get traction with funding. It's hard to get traction with customers with this wait and see approach. And I think there's an opportunity for the legacy folks to be really, really look out and see what the newcomers are doing with AI, and potentially those kind of mergers could be really powerful, because you can then share the sales force. You can piggyback with the sales force, the marketing strategy, and all that. So I think, when we're talking to our customers, if they're buyers, we're like, hey, programmatic buying, meaning, hey, we have, people out there constantly looking and sourcing and talking to founders, might be a way to do that. And those are easy clients to close for us. People are buying into that. I think, on the private equity side, Like if you were a well-run company with a healthy EBITDA, you're probably getting solicited, multiple times a day to sell your company. And again, that's where we come in, and maybe we have these relationships already, or we know how to talk to these folks to get them engaged, beyond the email, the triangulating and getting to the founders. So I think it's a tale of two cities, right? Or, like one is thriving. If you're a well-run company, there's a lot of interest. If you're a startup, you know, where's the proof of
Right.
efficacy, right?
Yeah, we run
So
into that a lot with kind of the where's the proof. I mean, I think that like having a story around ROI, outcomes, a really substantial client base is obviously really important. Maybe when you think about, kind of both the founders that are more from the venture backed companies and then also the private equity backed companies that you're working with, like what are you seeing as kind of being some of those key commercial milestones that these companies are needing to hit in order to get, kind of the attention from the buyers that you're working with. Would love to kind of hear your thoughts. We obviously work a lot in kind of the sales space, so always kind of curious, and we're always coaching companies as well around kind of like what they need to do from a revenue perspective. So understanding the buyer's perspective on those commercial milestones would be really interesting.
yeah, I think that, I mean, if you look at like the digital health space
Mhm.
and the early days, there were certain companies that had really invested in efficacy data and doing the studies and the trials. And I still think that that's just such an important part of this, right? Like telling a story around data is going to be much more effective than, just selling a concept.
Mhm.
So, as far as critical milestones, that's an early decision with a founder to say, we're going to invest a lot of money in understanding the efficacy of what we're trying to sell.
Mhm.
And that takes a lot more, backing to get these trials done. That's kind of a foundational, conversation in a
Yes.
lot of ways versus like a milestone of sales. So let's say you have that efficacy, like I think having a good, the go-to-market strategy is this going to have the least path of least resistance to a sale,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and segmenting and driving that. And so that
Right.
means that you need those people that really have done that before,
Mhm.
and that means that you might be, recruiting into, legacy companies like CVS, or, people have already done the self-insured employer piece, and so it becomes a talent thing pretty quickly
Mhm.
around, commercial strategy, brand strategy, but then the clinical and efficacy strategy, if that's missing, that's going to be a really big miss
Yes.
in the
Yes.
market going forward.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we find the same thing. I mean, so we obviously work with companies on their go-to-market strategy, but specific for the employer space. So, oftentimes what we find is that, even more established companies, there's an opportunity to kind of refine their value proposition and how they're targeting different buyer segments, especially as they're moving into different buyer types, and really to
mhm.
kind of tighten up that strategy. So, just curious if you're working with, perhaps a private equity backed company that is, looking to scale further, what your recommendations would be if you kind of notice that they are, kind of lagging in some of those areas. Is it normally you start to connect them with other people through your network from a talent perspective to fill those gaps like you were talking about?
Yeah, that's definitely a lot of the conversations we will have, and by being effective in that talent acquisition, whether it's, head of sales, head of marketing, and then the subcategories, the performance marketing piece, the growth marketing pieces, those are all important. Getting the right salespeople in place, those are all important. And then, if that's successful, then it actually, what tails that is either programmatic acquisition, so they can go faster through their own acquisition and maybe through their own backers. It might be like, okay, we see the path all by ourselves, and or it's through getting acquired. So you can see how these conversations are really intertwined: talent acquisition and mergers and acquisitions, and fractional CMOs, or things that you can do to save money, and burn rate if you're doing fractional stuff. So every case study is very different, but yeah, it's kind of a that feels to be like, okay, hey, we got FCC, we got a market. The market is accepting what we're selling.
Hmm.
How do we scale this? Who are the people we need? And then going into M&A conversations after
Yeah,
that.
that
So
makes sense.
that's
That
the
makes
best
sense.
way to do it. So
That
yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. So we work with a lot of companies, even larger companies, where, the founder or key people in the executive suite are still very much involved in kind of the day-to-day sales process. We call that kind of founder-led sales. And oftentimes companies, may or may not recognize that that can be a challenge to their
Hmm.
growth. And then, they start recognizing that, oh, we probably need a more scalable growth strategy and sales strategy that kind of goes beyond, the founder really leading, some of that, those efforts. So just curious if you've kind of run into the same thing, and then how you maybe coach companies on building out a more sophisticated sales and marketing team and talent and engine, when they've maybe been stuck in one of those motions where they've really been relying on kind of key people, in the executive suite historically.
That scenario often is, if you go back in the founder's experience, right, whether they were, maybe prior to being a founder, they're in an executive position, and maybe with sales, and there's always this thing of like, okay, it's really hard to find a great salesperson,
Hmm.
and a great sales leader. And so it's hard because you're kind of relying on your own network,
Hmm.
right? And so doing a robust kind of retained search process is really the answer to that. And, most investors and funders get that. Most founders take a little bit longer to understand that that's worth running that kind of a process to really have a recruiting firm out there telling your story, engaging the right people that are outside of your network, people that are inside of your network, referrals, like the whole thing. Like, you got to look at when you're those pivotal hires, you need to really be global in your thinking about that. And I think it's tough for founders when they're in it. They like that they're at the center of it. Like, it's why they did this business in the first place. And it's tough to let go of being in the center of it and not being the one bringing in they're often like, there's a Boy Scout quality to founders, right? They want to be the knife that can do everything. And they had to do that to get to where they were. And so, getting over that hump and realizing that, yeah, it's time to have someone. And so then I think where the pool that you're targeting is then going to be really important to get that effective salesperson, right? And again, it comes back to the efficacy of the product or service, and going to the market with that story. It's the same kind of story you're going to go to the investors with,
Hmm.
right, in order to attract the best talent.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a mental hurdle for founders to say, okay, I'm ready to turn this over and develop it. And then you have the right leader in place. The right leader is going to then, have their own kind of team that they can bring to the table, you know, um, to really build out that sales force, and bring in the segment sales leaders. So, but it's a fun process once they realize that, hey, that we're off to the races, and we are gonna grow because I'm going to invest in this.
Yeah, when they are off to the races and they are ready to grow, like you said at that point, and rapidly scale the company, like what do you normally coach them to around, for those kind of key early very important hires? Like what's the most important? Is it like culture? Is it mindset? Is it network? Is it expertise? Like what do you normally coach companies to like really look for in those first kind of key hires when they're ready to actually scale and they found product market fit?
I would say I always like err in on the side of culture all along, like the fit, the ability to just be honest with each other, that feeling that you're going to be comfortable and that the communication will flow between everyone that person is going to interact with. And that has to do with company culture, but then there's the fit between the founder and the sales leader or marketing leader, whoever they're hiring. But, I think equally or more important with a critical first hire like that will be the competency around, hey, yes, I've sold into this market. I know the people. I know what they're looking for and how to position this, right? And
Mhm.
and so the expertise, the competency, and that understanding of the space that they'll be expected to win
Mhm.
is going to be really critical.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's going to be
Um,
number one, culture number two.
Got it. Got it.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
you spoke a little bit about like the founder story and how that's important whenever you're going out there and acquiring talent, but then also on when you're actually going out there and you're trying to sell your company or raise capital as well, and really kind of coming to the table with like a strong story around your product, why you're here, what you're doing. Do you guys coach founders on those types of things? And do you have any, insights or recommendations on how you like to think about that?
That you brought up a great point. Like, I mean, we're just always doing it for ourselves, right?
Hmm.
Like, it's for the founder, but we spend an hour and a half, 2 hours, in our first meeting, and then it's a weekly conversation that continues to expand on that 2 hours. And so it's really we call it the creative brief, like, right? Like, we have to create a story around this to bring to the market. And it's funny because we like really never shared it exactly the way we probably do it. And, in a hot topic right now is employer brand, or it's been around for a couple of years, several years. We've dabbled in like consulting around that, but in the end, we're not really consultants. We are headhunters. So we haven't really been able to figure out how to do that. But it's a good point. I think, hey, here's our story that we're telling. Does it make sense? And does it make sense to you for you to
Is it
talk about it this
resonating?
way as
Yeah.
well?
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, we know it's resonating when we can get really tough to reach talent to engage.
Corey, thank you so much for being on. Is there anything else that you'd like to share in terms of just, what's going on right now, working with founders in this market, or any dynamics that you're kind of seeing that are current that we didn't touch on that you'd like to touch on in closing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interest right now with founders. I think there's just some innate volatility with you know the world right now, and it's hitting everybody. And healthcare is often tucked away and safe from things like this. And so founders have picked up the phone more often to talk about their options, and
Hmm.
that's smart. And I think there's safety in numbers, and there's a lot, like I said before, there's a lot of opportunity right now to combine forces, whether it's legacy and newcomer, putting 3 or 4 to 5 companies together that bring a different uh, solution to the problem.
Hmm.
So that's where we're going. We're going with, hey, uh, instead of just maybe bringing one company to a buyer, maybe we'll package four founders together and say, hey, what about this thesis of bringing these companies together? Would it make sense? And would you want to be the investor? And, so that's getting to be really fun to see where the puzzle pieces fit, and kind of having those daily conversations with founders, what their goals are and what they want to do, and then saying, hey, you would really work well with this company,
Mhm.
and even helping them with the potential of merging alone, without an investor. So
Yeah, I think that that is absolutely on trend. We're seeing a ton of consolidation as well. And just even in our
yeah,
space, like the rise of more and more marketplaces and aggregators, just such an important role, especially since there's so many different vendors out there that are doing, different solving, small, different individual problems. But if you can bring things together, they're probably going to get, significantly more traction and solve a bigger problem combined. So that makes a ton of sense.
yeah, great.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for coming on, Cory. Any final words that you'd like to share?
I think that was a great conversation. I really appreciate you inviting me